Hi, I'm Sue Stockdale, your host for the Sports 2000 podcast. In this series, I'm talking to some of the people involved in this British sports car prototype series that gives drivers a chance to compete at some of the UK and Europe's finest circuits, and is often called one of motorsport's best kept secrets. Today, you can hear part 2 of my interview with Derek Bell MBE, considered by many to be the greatest British racing driver ever to compete in endurance racing. Derek won the Le Mans 24-hour 5 times, the Daytona 24-hour 3 times, and the World Sports Car Championship twice. Derek's also president of the SRCC Sports 2000 Racing Car Club. And in my conversation with him today, I'll be finding out why he thinks Sports 2000s are a great way to experience close racing and why emotion plays such an important role in being successful. Welcome to the podcast, Derek.
Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
So I'm wondering, just turning our attention to the Sports 2000 cars, the Duratec's and the Pintos, since we're on the Sports 2000 podcast. I know you've driven them a few times around Brands Hatch.
Yeah.
How do they compare to your driving other cars? What do you think of driving a Sports 2000?
Basically, a car is a car. A racing car is a car. A racing car is a racing car. And I'm comparing the 2000s, if you like, with the Mirage that I drove that was an open cockpit racer, the Jules Porsche from 81. I mean, they're racing cars. And they're basically all the same. It's just that some are heavier, but in turn, they have much more power. So for the guys that are in Sports 2000, the way forward is obviously to develop up into the faster cars, whether it be through GT racing, depends which way they lean. I think the opportunity that Sports 2000 gives them is to get a very strong, basic feel of almost wheel-to-wheel racing, because it's really sort of, you're right down basics. You're sitting in a cockpit of a car, bit of plastic around you, not tremendous, protection if anything really went wrong, like sitting in a Ford Mustang or something like that. You're in a very specific car. It teaches you a lot more track craft and also how to make moves on people at the right time. And also, I think as far as Sports 2000 is concerned, it teaches you, we call it rehearsing for an overtake. You'll take a look at the thing, I think I can get in there. That's the only place on the 3-mile lap round Brands Hatch that I can get by is into that corner because he goes a little wide there. And I think if I nip down the inside on the brakes, I could get him. And so you've analysed it to the point that you know where you're going to overtake, unless you happen to be following him. The guy just happens to go a bit wide and you go, oh, that was a relief. That saved me a lot of effort. But the fact is, 2000 gives you that grassroots base of motor racing. There are other formula. You have single-seaters, obviously. But I think not that many go upwards through single-seaters. I was lucky enough to go through Formula 3, Formula 2, and Formula 1. It isn't that feasible these days. Fortunately, people don't get killed as much and have serious injuries, where in my day, I reckon 30% of the drivers died. It was pretty evil. Nowadays, it's much safer. So as a young driver, you must look and go, how the heck do I get through that grid in Italy this weekend? How do I end up getting in there? It can happen, but you've got to have an immense talent to get there. And where do you prove it? And it's not just a matter of having the talent. It's being in the right car to do it. How do you do it? You've got enough money to buy the right car to go and prove it. And so few drivers work their way through, and they'll have the luck or the good fortune to get into that situation. But I think 2000 is a great, and that's why I got involved with it. In my opinion, I could see that was the way up into top sports cars because of the technology in the car, with the brakes, the weight, the engine power, the handleability, the sense of driving in an open cockpit racer. That's it. And I think whether it be either model of car, whichever year it is, it's still the same basic thing.
Here we are back talking about senses again.
Yeah. Well, it is.
In terms of how important it is as part of racing, I get the sense that it is important.
Well, it is, absolutely. You don't always think of it like that, but you are thinking, which is really what you're saying. You're thinking of every single aspect of the car, and when you change it. I mean, when I drove the cars at Brands Hatch that day, I think I'd done it before too, a few years before in the early days. And I remember it was so nice to drive these cars. They were different. One of the problems that happens, and I wouldn't blame anybody in Sports 2000, but it happens in these junior formula or elementary formula or formula where you're working your way through to get up to something better and bigger. It's a wonderful base to get into racing and to learn your craft. If you could do 10 or 15 races a year, it's magnificent. It's better than doing a lot of other formula that are available because of the type of car that it is and the type of drivers And I think always the fact that if you hit somebody, that you might have an accident. Now, a lot of guys get out there and it could be in touring cars and they know they punt them off. Well, so what? He's going to slip into the bank, but he'll get out because it's big. I think in these cars, you're closer to the real thing, to real racing. And that's why I think it's just so beneficial to people to get into Sports 2000 and cars like that and then work their way up from that.
I know you're president of the SRCC Sports 2000 Racing Club, Derek. What are your hopes in terms of the future of the club? How do you think it might continue to evolve and flourish into the future?
I think it really depends on the people at the top and how they manage it and their enthusiasm. And I've seen so many guys in other formula and other types of racing sort of have bickering at the top. You've got to work together. It's like everything in life. What we're doing in Sports 2000 is teamwork. And everybody's got to work together. And it's no good somebody saying, well, my Duratec's quicker than your Pinto or vice versa or whatever. It doesn't matter. We can all change and drive the other type of car if we have to. The thing is, it comes down to cost and at the same time, who runs the program. And I think what they have got organized now, the series they have, who they work with around the country, is very advantageous. I think Jonathan Palmer and his team have done a heck of a job for motor racing, the young motor racing field, although I've got 15 years now, perhaps longer. And I think they're in the right place. They don't need to try to be clever. They need to just, on their base, consolidate and improve internally. I know the cars are older, but there is room for the older cars. And that maybe they have to have separate races if it were possible. I know it's not always possible. But if you get enough people that want to drive in the races with the older cars, well, then let them. And I think also, you have a thing in these formula where you have people of different ages. Now, the young people have got to have a base to start in to make their move up. And it's wonderful if they can go through Sports 2000 on the way. They all think, well, I got to be in Formula 4 or Formula 3 or Formula Mazda or whatever it is. And in a way, they're right. They do have to be in single-seaters. But Sports 2000, I would suggest, is considerably cheaper. And it's going to give them the chance to learn from the senior drivers. And I've read bits about Sports 2000. And the fact they do try and help guys get on to improve. Sometimes it's not always that good, but some people, I think you have to fathom out amongst yourselves just who is a good instructor. Some people aren't very good at it. And some people, it's not very easy for them to impart that knowledge. If you follow them on a racetrack, you go, wow, he's amazingly good. But when he tries to explain what he's doing, it doesn't come over quite as well. You always have the possibility that he's not going to help a 17-year-old when he's 35 because that little bugger is going to blow me off next week. So it is difficult. But my feeling from seeing the Sports 2000 guys, and I saw one of the photographs that we did for Octane a few years ago, their heart's in the right place. They have great enthusiasm. I don't think they can afford to have internal strife. This is happening in other formula, as I mentioned just now. They've got to have cohesion the whole way through. Motor racing is difficult enough to get into. And I think when you're there and you've got a strong base, you should just consolidate and do what you went to do, not try and be clever and go too far. I mean, they're never going to get up to world-class racing. But the fact is you can do Sports 2000 in America, in Canada, and probably other countries as well. And that would be great. How we'd in the upper echelons of sports car. We used to race in South Africa at Kyalami and then down at Cape Town. And there's no reason you could and do Sports 2000s in there. Somebody's going to say, who can afford to go? I'm just saying it should be there as a possibility. That's why the formulas should work for each country. And one of the things that I was lucky in my high period during the 80s was that America and the rest of the world had a very similar formula. We could use the same cars, all right, slightly different engines, but all Porsche engines in this case, but one turbo or two turbos, those sort of rules and regulations. But the cars basically were the same. And so that's how I managed to have such a career, as I was racing in the World Championship with the factory, the Rothmans Porsche. And then I would go to America the next weekend and race in Detroit or something in the American Porsche team. And I was very lucky, but I wasn't the only one. Hans Stuck did it, Jochen Mass did it. I could go through a list of people that all went over to Tiffany Dell. And I mean, we all went over to do the races, and it was wonderful. And it gave us 2 to 3 times as many races. And then those races would be in Australia, and we finished the year in South Africa for the last race. But I remember in that era, they had a thing called the Springbok in South Africa. They had a Springbok series, and that was for 2-litre sports cars. Very popular. We had it in Europe. I raced for Abarth, or Seller Abarth, with Mazzario as in another car. And I mean, and Gerard Larousse, and no end of drivers drove in 2000. basically 2000. You might say, well, they're probably more expensive, but it was still basically that sort of car. We wouldn't necessarily race against the big cars that I also raced. They would be separate. So you would have 300-kilometer races at Nürburgring and Spa and Dijon. I remember going to Madrid. I remember John Watson was driving against me. I mean, all these people were out there. And that's what I think Sports 2000 should be getting itself close to. But of course, up goes the price of it all. So it's not as easy just to say, let's go and do that. I think what they're doing is really valuable. It means the guys have a very limited budget. They can go and do it, push the car away and bring it out 2 weeks later, dust it off, check the oil and go and do some racing without it costing them a fortune to go around the world. But it's good to give them that opportunity to participate in the South African tour, if there was one, or in the Canadian tour, if they had 8 races. You wouldn't go off in the winter to Canada because it's colder than the Arctic Circle. But you might come down to Florida. I remember my son Justin did Formula Ford, and he came across from England to do the Formula Ford series in Florida because it was 60, 70 degrees all the time. And you went and did 6 races, and it gave you that chance to gain experience. The whole thing about racing is experience. And then we're now talking about the younger people who want to be better, not the 40-year-olds who come into it with they sold their business, wanted to have a good time racing. They are the base of the whole thing. But, it's the young kids that can take advantage of that.
So it's got potential of opportunity for all age groups in terms of that category and what's available. Hi, it's me again. To let you know that support for this podcast comes from Broadtown Brewery, the microbrewery in Wiltshire with big ambitions. Their diverse assortment of beers range from classic best bitters and hoppy American West Coast IPAs, through to Baltic porters and Belgian triples. Only the best quality ingredients go into their beers, and their close attention to detail ensures that you can drink beers that are full of flavour and true to style. You can have them delivered straight to your doorstep, no matter where you live. So go on over to the website broadtownbrewery.co.uk and make your choice now. You used the word learning there, Derek, and I want to just ask you around what you've learned through all of your years in motorsport. What have you learned about you during that time?
I didn't think about it until in the last couple of years. And I guess during this damn pandemic, and I sort of look on my bookshelf and I go, gosh, I've written 3 books now. And you look at it and you get realization and you suddenly go, actually, I had a pretty good career. I learned that I'd had a good career and I was very fortunate. But I think what was rare or was astonishing for me was that it went on for so long because I happened to luckily just drop into the right slot. Now, there were people that were 5 years behind me or more, maybe 10. And because I got to know them at Porsche. And those guys were so talented. They were 15, 20 years younger than me. They did so well. Like Nick Tandy's been doing really well in Porsche Cup and then racing for Porsche. And then he won Le Mans. He did that once or twice, did Le Mans, but he won it once. I mean, he had the talent. But they didn't persist running that program. So he's back to driving 911s, and now he drives Corvettes. And there's a very good reason. They're very strong. And I think he could see the future was strong. And he was probably going to get paid a hell of a lot more money. There's a point at some point that you have to think, well, it actually would be bad to earn some money out of this. I'm probably straying from what you're asking me. But I think I was lucky in that I was in the right place at the right time so often. And I know that my colleagues at that time look at me and that lucky bloke who just happened to be there to get the drive. But when you get that drive, you've got to do a good job. You're not going to get 2 chances. You go out and do a good job. And then after that, they go, you better have him again. He did quite well. And it's heckishly difficult to get into a team for the first time. Let's say sort of turn up this weekend at Silverstone. You've never been there before. Or you've never driven the car before. Or both. You've never been there. You've never driven the car. But your one big opportunity is at Silverstone. But when you look around on the grid, everybody there has been to Silverstone 6 times before. And the guys around you have all driven their cars before. You're actually on a hiding to nothing because you're not going to be able to go as quick as they do. All you got to do is do a good job, and hopefully at some point it shows. And I think I was lucky that I did that on a number of occasions. And I know I was lucky and fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. And I suppose in the same way, I didn't have any accidents worth really mentioning apart from the upside down on the banking at Daytona. So I was very fortunate, and I really realized that. But I think it's not luck, it's good fortune. And I think in some cases, just choosing the right route. But it wasn't always chosen by. I mean, I drove some pretty crappy cars over the years. I was asked to write a story. Would I contribute to a story about a Formula One car I drove called a Techno? And Techno, the guy who owned Techno, had built karts, Formula 3 cars, Formula 2 cars, and I raced against them at Formula 3 level and at Formula 2. And Regazzoni and Francois Servet drove them. It's impossible to beat them. I came second in the European Championship twice to those guys in Formula 2. And they decided to go to Formula 1. The year they decided to go to Formula 1, I was offered the drive because at that point, my career had only been over 3 years, and they said he's finished because he wasn't really good enough. So I started to drop out of Formula 1, and I was offered this drive in the Martini Techno. And it was awful. I mean, it was a shocking car. And this guy phones me up 15 years ago. We're doing a book about Techno. We'd love to hear your comments. Because there's lots of pictures of me in the Techno. Even now, I get pictures every week. Would you sign the car? And the reason they got so many pictures is the car was so damn slow, they could get plenty of time to get a shot without it blurring. If I was in a real race, they would be so fast, they would have got the shot. And it was really an appalling car. It broke. It actually started to break in the middle in my very first event in the French Grand Prix. It wasn't much fun. And so they said, what do you think about the Techno? And I just said, if ever I had a Formula One career, Techno made sure it didn't go on any further. And that's the truth. It's awful to say that, but that was really one of those things.
So in terms of your kind of abiding memories of your career, Derek, are there any particular highlights or memorable points that spring to mind?
I think the most memorable moment, the most memorable race of my life was in 1995 Le Mans, and I drove with my son Justin and Andy Wallace. It was the second time I drove with him at Le Mans. In 92, I drove with Justin as well in a Porsche, but that wasn't so good. I think we finished 12th or something. And then we were in 95. We went through and were leading the race for like 12 or 16 hours through the night in the chucking rain in a car that should never have been there. All the top sort of prototype cars fell out. We qualified in the top 10, and we got into a leading position. We couldn't believe it, the three of us. We drove incredibly well, and we ended up finishing third through a mechanical reason. We finished third, and I was up on the winner's roster with my son on Father's Day, and that was pretty spectacular. You can't really beat that with a memorable, can you?
Certainly not. I was just thinking about that idea of sort of paying it forward or leaving a legacy. I'm wondering, what do you think is going to be your legacy that you've left in sports car racing?
I haven't really thought about that. I don't know what point you think about a legacy. Is it when they're just lowering you into that pit? I'm not sure, but like last thought, yeah, I did all right, I suppose. It should be a video, shouldn't it, really? I think the one thing that I think I passed on to people was being calm. I'd never really had a row with other drivers. I never had a row on the track. I never pushed anybody off purposely. And I never really had any major accidents. I did in the early days in Formula 3. I think we all did. But I just think it's a matter of control. To me, it's sort of having a controlled aggression. That's what you need to be good in car racing. You don't have to think you're the best in the world because you become unpleasant. And we've seen that with a number of drivers over the years. And I think it happens in every class. You can watch the Sports 2000, a bloke wins the race 5 times in the year. You think, well, he's very good. Then you go, hold on a minute. He's got more money than anybody else. So he's building the better car. He's having newer equipment on it. And they got young Peter Jones at the back, who's had the same engine for 2 years. Has to run on scruffy old tires that somebody else has given him, donated him. He's the guy you should watch because he's the one that's going to push through, not the guy that's flashing around at the front, because they don't always come out. And I know that happened during my career.
I think you've given us a lovely summary of our conversation today, Derek, because I think for me, what I've sensed is that whole thing about being aware of one's emotions, managing them, and particularly, as you said, the controlled aggression and calmness when it's required is actually what gets you there. So no wonder you're successful, have been successful in endurance categories. Not the short-term sprint, but the endurance.
You're right, but I never planned it that way. Do you know what I mean? Just the way it turned out. One day, Hans Stuck, way back in my Porsche days in the mid-'80s, I remember Porsche saying to me, who would you like as your teammate next year? Because I've had Jackie B with Jackie X quite a bit. And then, bless him, Stefan Beloff came on the team and he got killed. And he was brought in age 22 and I was 52 or 48 or something. And I really wish I could have helped him more. I called him son and he called me father. And it was a lovely relationship. He was an immense talent, but I don't think he was guided properly by the people that in his team overall. I'm disappointed in that. I've always said that. But that's neither here nor there in reality. But as far as I was concerned at that time, Hans Stuck, then they said to me, we'd like you to drive with Hans Stuck, because Jackie had retired, Stefan had gone. We'd Hans Stuck drive with you. In fact, Stefan had left the team and then subsequently had his accident the next year. But so I said, I'd go with Hans Stuck. And I thought, that, am I sure about this? Because when you look at it, there aren't many drivers out there that are like, in my own mind, like myself, with the same mentality. And I was worried about choosing the wrong person. I really didn't think there were that many out there I could choose that would have been available. And I said, no, okay. And I thought, we had a few incidents the last couple of years, but then I thought, well, he was in a crappy car. He used to sort of get yodeling as he went round the Nürburgring and sort of see how fast he could go. So I was a bit concerned. Anyway, he came on the team, and of course, he never went off the road again. He had one slight incident in Japan, and that was all he had. I don't think I had a single incident in our 4 years together, but we won the World Championship twice, and we won Le Mans twice. So we were quite a good pairing. I remember about 5 or 6 years ago, we became a very close friend inevitably. All my teammates did, really. And you have to have that relationship. I remember Stucky over a glass of schnapps, he sort of said, you realize that Professor Bott, who was the head of Weissach at that time at Porsche, he said, I'm putting you with Derek Bell because he'll straighten you out. He will guide you. And they didn't tell me that, but that's what he tells me 10, 15 years later, that's why we were put together, because he needed some control. Maybe that was because even after Stefan had gone, that maybe they realized perhaps they could have done more with to help Stefan rather than this free spirit going as fast as he could. You had to be controlled or had to know your limits.
And are you providing that guidance for your son?
He doesn't race anymore. No, I think I put him off as well. I did try, and I think he was actually pretty good. Again, it's like being the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, he went and drove single-seaters in America with the support race for IndyCar, and he was quick. He was in the top 3 or 4 on numerous occasions. And, of course, he won Le Mans in the Dodge Viper, but not in the outright winning car. We finished 3rd together in the McLaren in torturous conditions. But he didn't get as much experience as he could have done if he'd just happened to fall into the right car at the right time. And maybe my guidance wasn't quite as clever as I thought it was, but at the same time, nobody guided me. And I tried to learn from my experiences. There was one occasion when I think I should have steered him towards, when he was in Formula Ford, I should have pushed him into another car or said, come on, you've got to get in that car somehow. And I didn't. And I think that was wrong. My fault.
I think sometimes our children or our family members are the ones who listen to us least.
Yeah.
That's the reality the world over often.
Absolutely true, yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today, Derek, and to hear your reflections and your thoughts about Sports 2000.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you, Sue.
I hope you enjoy hearing from Derek Bell again in part 2 of the interview with him. And if you enjoyed listening to this Sports 2000 podcast, please do help us to spread the word. Why not leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or tell your friends about the podcast too, so that more people can hear it. You can find Sports 2000 on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, or over on the website at sports2000.co.uk. In the next episode, I will be talking to Ross Hyatt, who has driven many race cars in his career. He owns 3 Pinto race cars and races with his son Nick, who he says he got into racing to stop him playing rugby at an international level. I'm going to be fascinated to hear what Ross has to say about driving in such races as the Classic Le Mans and Goodwood Revival. So I look forward to connecting with you again then.